today? Come on, light up that chat. Where are you joining us from?
Well,
Indonesia,
welcome to our international visitors from Indonesia and the Philippines.
Taiwan.
Taiwan.
You can keep the music going. We're going to let folks give them about 3 minutes. We're going to start 5 minutes after. Just give folks some space to come into the room. As you are coming in, share your name, where you're joining us from, and your role. And don't forget to set your Zoom view to gallery. If you do that, it's going to hide all of the non-video participants. Give me thumbs up. You guys can see my screen pretty good. All right, awesome. We're rocking and rolling. Somebody said, go Dodgers. Would that be Lisa? Yes, it is. Barbados, welcome. Iowa State. Yes, yes, keep it going, keep it going. I see Houston is here today. Hi, Brittany. Where are you from, Brittany? Wisconsin. There's lots of international folks. Cleveland, Ohio. Go ahead, Candace, and represent California. Tell them you're here. Michigan, Tennessee. We will be in Tennessee next week. Awesome. Some Boston folks here. Henderson, Nevada. I know where that is. Oh, Nighthawks. All right. Got one more minute. Come on, keep dropping them. Where are you from? Where are you joining us from today? What did we start? Go Padres. What are we doing today? Come on.
That's a big rivalry we're talking about.
Okay.
SoCal rivalry, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Drop your names. Come on, keep it going. Drop your names in the chat. Where you're joining us from? What's your role? How do you make a difference for kids? Don't forget, we're getting ready to start, but set your Zoom view to gallery. That way it will hide all of the non-video participants. So give you guys a few seconds to go ahead and get that down, get that done. I saw that. All right, New York. We've had New York on all three Power Up series. Shout out to New York. And then here we go again. That's right. Go Nighthawks. I'm not gonna tell them, Candace, that I have I have some ties to the Nighthawks. All right. All right. I think we can get started. Man, we have a pretty full room, and I'm so excited that you are joining us today. Before we dive in, as always, I want to start off by sharing just a little bit about PBL Works. And I'm going to first allow our panelists to introduce themselves. And we're going to start off with Ari and then Candace, and then I'll introduce myself and then John.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ari Dolit. I'm Director of Curriculum Design here at PBL Works. I oversee the development of ELA, Social Studies, and Science project-based curriculum units.
And my name is Candice Arancibia. Buenas tardes. I am coming to you from Chula Vista, California, and I am a history and social studies curriculum developer. I work alongside Ari. Prior to that, I was part of the national faculty and a 20-year educator.
Thank you, Ari and Candace. I am Dr. Lucretia Terrence, and I am the Director of District Engagement at PBL Works. I have been in education for over 25 years, and I am just one of your co-hosts. I'm going to turn it over to John.
Hi, everyone. This is John Larmer. I'm a senior fellow at PBL Works. Before that, I spent almost 20 years with the Buck Institute for Education and PBL Works as an editor-in-chief, and I began as a high school social studies teacher. So glad to be here with you today.
Thank you, team. Before we get started, let me share that at PBL Works, our exclusive focus is project-based learning because we believe that PBL advances educational equity and empowers youth furthest from opportunity. It's transformative for all kids. We established that on yesterday. We keep on saying PBL for all. Through PBL, students engage in learning that is deep, long-lasting, and relevant to their own lives and the world they will ultimately inherit. Our services and tools and research are designed to build capacity for K-12 teachers, to design and facilitate quality project-based learning, and the capacity of school leaders to create the conditions for teachers to implement great projects with all students. So let's take some time to frame the experience that you will have in today's webinar. Through today's experience, you will have the opportunity to hear from PBL expert Ari and Candice. They will share how to align PBL practices with educational standards. Our hope is that every teacher, every instructional coach, curriculum designer, school and district leader are able to take away something new through our discussions. At PBL Works, our vision is for all students, especially Black and Brown students, to engage in high quality project-based learning to deepen learning and achieve success in college, career, and life. We know that students who experience high quality PBL will develop both content knowledge and success skills, such as communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. They will also develop a stronger sense of self and start to see how they can contribute to their families and the community by applying the knowledge and the success skills that they learn through these authentic, different experiences. At the heart of the work that we do, it is a deep desire to support teachers in implementing high quality PBL. If you're looking at the screen, we have developed this model for gold standard PBL. The diagram on the left shows the essential project design elements, and on the right, we have our project-based teaching practices. Many of the elements in both of the frameworks will be familiar to you. There's some overlap there with traditional teaching practices. We think that if students experience at least 2 gold standard projects per year, they'll be able to gain the benefits that PBL can bring. And lastly, I want to share also at the center of our work is a deep desire to support teachers in implementing high quality PBL. So we developed this model we developed this model of gold standard PBL to help our students. I'm sorry, I'm advancing ahead. I'm doing 2 things at one time.
Equity levers.
Bloopers, go back. All right. So I'm supposed to pass that on to John. That's what I get for trying to take over. So John, go ahead and explain those equity levers.
Yeah, we're also, as we said in our vision statement, committed to making sure PBL works and is accessible to all students, especially Black and Brown students. So we developed these 4 equity levers that we think will help make that a reality. Knowledge of students, cognitive demand, literacy, and shared power. All those things are part of our work with teachers and students and administrators in making sure PBL can serve all kinds of students, not just some. All right, I want to talk a little bit about how PBL units can be aligned with standards before our panelists sort of give you their thoughts. This will be quick, I promise. Let's just go to the next slide. I wanted to just make the point that on our teaching practices model, you see aligned to standards up there on top. We put it there because we think it's very important to sort of overcome the stereotype that PBL is not good for teaching content. We believe if it's done well, in its design and its implementation by teachers, it can teach content very well. And our experience and research has shown this. All right. So next slide is a row from our project-based teaching rubric. And as you can see, it's got a beginning PBL teacher column, a developing PBL teacher, and a gold standard PBL teacher. That's the, advanced practice. And as you can see, the products, that there are two sort of main bullets in that right-hand column, in all columns. The products in a project are carefully aligned with standards, and so is the scaffolding a teacher provides, and so are the assessment tools a teacher uses in the classroom. All right. So it's important that everything aligns to standards in a project, and especially a good indicator of that is the driving question, the product, and the standards in a project. The driving question, the product, and the standards. So let's look at an example. All right, here's a project. This is where students were challenged to redesign a public space to promote a social benefit. So they created a design for the space and presented it to key stakeholders. So the content the teacher assessed were critical thinking, engineering design, math, and speaking and listening standards. So this is an example of a project that is in alignment. You can see the driving question is aligned to both the product and the learning goals. To answer that question, students will need to learn the content and the skills listed. And via the final product and the accompanying presentation, students have the chance to showcase their critical thinking abilities as they justify their decisions. And then engineering design principles and math concepts are not only evident in the student's design, it comes through their explanation of the design to the audience. And lastly, through the presentation and subsequent audience questions, students' speaking and listening abilities can be assessed. Now let's look at a project that's not in alignment. You can see in this one, it's out of alignment. The learning goal is persuasive writing. The driving question asks students to take a stand on a controversial issue. But the product is an informational brochure. So that's not a persuasive kind of product. It doesn't require students to show they can write persuasively. So you got to check for that alignment. Those aligned projects, it all sort of makes sense. The driving question, the content, and the product. So it's important to check your alignment for those three things. All right, Lucretia, back to you.
Thank you, John. So we wanted to give you a little bit of framing around how do we keep projects aligned to standards. And so we want to go a little bit deeper, and that is going to take us straight to our PBL experts. We want to hear from them, their experiences. They're going to share stories. They're going to share some resources, and they're going to drive this conversation with this driving question. How can PBL units be aligned with standards? I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can see their wonderful faces. And we're just going to get started with Ari. Ari, what is the first thing you think about when you think of that driving question of how can PBL units be aligned to standards? What's the first thing come to mind?
Thanks for that question, Lucretia. And first of all, I think I messed up my intro because I didn't talk about no one knows who I am besides what I do at PBL Works. So if I could just say for a minute, former high school English teacher, former instructional coach, and now director of curriculum design with a great team at PBL Works, and a former classroom practitioner of project-based learning. So, standards are tricky. That's the first thing that comes to mind. I don't think anyone gets into this game of teaching in PBL because we are so jazzed about the standards. We are jazzed about building amazing humans, right? Critical thinking, fantastic, heart-driven people, right? Who are going to help us build a better world. And so when it comes to the standards, though, we know that they're important for a lot of reasons. One, academically in our classroom, we as educators are responsible, and students are responsible for learning very important concepts. And we know, so sometimes when I think about the standards, I think about this framing of within and beyond, within and beyond. The standards themselves, the disciplinary standards, help us understand what is our responsibility and what we are responsible for to teach our students academically. And we also know that we want to do more. And that's why in the center of that teaching practices graphic is key knowledge, understanding, and success skills, because we know that we want students not just to be able to read the word, but as Paulo Freire talks about, read the world as well, right? Beyond is also thinking about the success skills. There are big, enduring understandings, as Wiggins and McTighe talk about, that we want kids to walk away with. And that's beyond the academic standards. But from an equity perspective, we have a real responsibility to ensure that every single student walks out with those core academic skills and concepts and knowledge that we are responsible for supporting them in developing, right? So when it comes to PBL, I think about that within, what do I have to do, right? And then beyond, what do I really want to make sure students develop? That's sort of like the first thing I think about. Candace, what are your thoughts on that?
I love that you had said being able to read the word and then being able to read the world. I think that that is like the essence of project-based learning is like we teach so much more that go beyond the standard. And like when we talk about our ideal graduate, yes, we are talking about like what are the content and skills we want students to walk away with, but project-based learning offers just so much more. It's just the nature of project-based learning.
Yeah, and I don't want to make anyone think that we don't use the standards. I am such like when Candace and I develop our projects, the first question we ask each other, what are the skills and concepts we want students to walk away with? How do we understand what the standard is asking of students, right? And so for me, we take concepts and we want to be inspired by amazing concepts happening out in the world. But I think that there's a pitfall in there around I can make any standards fit into a project. That's one way to think about it, but we're not going to be precise in the way we need to be to design the project to elicit certain performances that the standards call for. And so I think we've got to like have our eyes really focused in on the actual language of the standards to be able to figure out what do we want kids walking away with from this project.
That is so awesome. So Ari, or Candace, how do I make my standards into actionable outcomes? So if I'm choosing a project, how do I even start with standards? What do I look at? What are some things that you would suggest?
Yeah. So back in 2012, when the Common Core standards came out, one of the first things that I learned how to do was to unpack standards. And in our work today in designing project-based units, that's the first thing that we do. We unpack standards. So before we even get to alignment, we first have to unpack them. And that journey begins with looking at the language. And so we actually think about standards across 3 dimensions: knowledge, skills, and concepts. And so when we unpack standards, we actually look at the verbs in the statements. And a standard might say, evaluate the impact of something, right? And so we see that word evaluate, and the first thing we do is we ask ourselves, well, what does that actually mean for an 8th grader to evaluate? And we get really clear about what that performance of evaluation should look like, sound like, and feel like. Because when we think about evaluation, it's about making a judgment. But in order to make a judgment, you first have to be able to summarize whatever it is that you're making a judgment about. You have to be able to identify the multiple approaches that were taken, right? If it's a social studies examination, right? Historical examination. You have to look at all the different possibilities, and then you have to look at the strengths and limits and be able to assess the strengths and limits. You might even assess the intensity of the impact, right? And then you get to judgment. And that is a lot of cognitive steps to give kids practice with. And so we get really clear, what should it look like, sound like, and feel like? And one way we do that is by prototyping, which Candace, I think you probably are in the best position to talk about.
Yes. And so I want to add on to your conversation. And so we want to be able to understand what it looks like at an eighth grade level, but also look at the language and look at that vertical articulation and understand the nuance between, well, this is what it looks like in seventh grade, and this is how I build on to help my students grow as an eighth grader. So it's important to know developmentally where students should be and where they are coming from and where they are going. But to move the conversation into prototyping. And so prototyping is a big part of the work that we do. And part of it is like, I have to understand and unpack the standard. What is it exactly that my students need to be able to do to create this particular product that we're soliciting? And in doing that work, I noticed for myself that I really develop a sense of empathy for my students and really start to understand where they might struggle or where they're going to glow in this project. But then I also understand, like, well, what are the scaffolds that I need to put in place for particular students? And also, what might be the sequence of my learning? And so, just in prototyping, I'm doing so much of the calendaring of my project because I'm really starting to pull out the mini lessons that I'm going to plop into my calendar. And also in the prototyping part, I'm also going to be looking at, like, well, what are the key pieces that students are going to develop out? And those become my formative assessments. And so we can see already just in prototyping, and this is pre-work that we do before we actually decide what is going to be the final product, because I have to see if what I am creating is going to be in alignment. So even before I decide, yes, this is my final product, I have to actually test it out for myself. But so we are going to, as we are doing this, we are developing out the scope and sequence. We're developing out our mini lessons and our scaffolds that we are going to do. But I think that the really big important piece in this is that you get a feel of what your students are going to be experiencing. And just know that as you are prototyping, it's not set in stone. It's like, just go out and do it, try it, and know that it's almost like a living document, and you're going to adjust to see maybe like this. So for example, I was working on an art proposal, and there were pieces of the art proposal that were not soliciting the standards, but then there was like the project overview, which really did solicit the standards. So I might just pull out the project overview in the art proposal, and then that becomes their project, rather than all of the artistic themes and project goals. But I just really want to focus in on that one piece.
That's really good. Oh, we have someone that's talking. So to just tag along with that, you've shared, and our tech team, they're taking care of that real quick. You've shared how to make those standards into actionable outcomes. When you have, and I'm kind of pulling from the chat as well, because I believe that as folks are coming in, it's going to really continue to make our conversation go a little bit deeper. But if I have a district pacing guide, it goes right along with our question. How do you know which standards to use when you're starting a project? How you know?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question, because we know that oftentimes that we are sort of lockstep with our colleagues. There are big expectations on us to cover as much as possible over the course of the year and in a particular order. And so we actually have some criteria that we use to be able to determine which standards and which concepts are appropriate and important enough to be able to focus on. Actually, do we have any slides that we can pop up there to show folks? And maybe we can talk about that real quick. This is helpful. Thank you. You guys are good. Just have these like right on cue for us. So we talk about these two criteria. Are the content and skills important to student learning, and are they appropriate as the central focus? And so when you've got your pacing guide and you're like, okay, well, I've got 3 weeks. I know a project is going to take about 3 weeks. Where do I put it in, right? So we use these two criteria. Do we have some definition slides we can use too? Just talk for, oh, beautiful, great. So in terms of importance, right? This is where you look at that pacing guide and you say, is this a key standard? And when we talk about key standards, we're really thinking about those power standards, the ones that it is so important for a student to learn in 7th grade or in 8th grade that they really, if they move on to 9th grade without this, that's going to be hard for them, right? So we look for those standards. We look for a standard to be fundamental to continued learning. And that's sort of connected to what I was just sharing as well. If they don't learn this thing, they can't move on to the next. And then is it a core or cross-cutting concept? So that idea I was talking about before about impact. We know that impact is related to cause and effect, and we know that cause and effect comes up in science, in social studies, in ELA, right? Even in math. So we know that that idea, if we see that concept within a standard, that tells us this is important, right? The next criteria.
Do you mind, Ari, real quick? Let me know. Give me a drop in the chat. Can you see the slides? We want to make sure you get all of this important information. Let us know. Can you see it? Yes, no.
We got a yes. We got
Yes,
yeses.
yes, we got a yes. All right, go for it. I saw a couple of folks saying they couldn't see, so I just wanted to make sure because we don't want to leave anybody out.
That's right. That's right. Can you, do we have slides about
I can go.
appropriate? Great. Fantastic. So the other way to figure this out is if the standards call for in-depth exploration and understanding, and if they require significant time to learn, right? So we know that there are some concepts and standards that are just more complex, more nuanced. And so when we put those together, when we find those, and oftentimes there will not just be one standard, but probably two standards that play together really well. We find those two, those are the ones where we say, okay, this is important. This is worth our time to explore through a project because kids need lots of opportunities to practice and deepen their understanding to really be able to get this. Candace, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just dropped that in the chat. And so I think what you're saying is that we're grouping appropriate standards, that some standards really go together. And a beautiful thing of the work that we do is like we group standards together to create a story. And so really that like I always think that people in writing, like people stay for the story that you're going to be able to tell. And that's really what we're doing with the standards is we are creating a story that students are going to be able to engage in.
Yeah, it's almost like if they can understand this, it'll naturally lead to this next place for inquiry and understanding and exploration, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's how we think about that. When it comes to choosing the standards, I think there's something important to talk about with leaders as well, because we've primarily focused our conversation on teachers and probably like coaches who are helping teachers think about which projects or how do they better align the products and the driving questions and choose the projects. But for leaders, your work in standards is really important as well. When I was an instructional coach in a school district, shout out to San Leandro Unified, in the Bay Area of California, I would often work with school leaders to look across their school site or even across the district at the district level to see what standards, what core standards the projects their teachers were doing focused on. Because as a leader, we're looking at coherence. We're looking at the whole picture at an elementary school from the moment a child enters in kindergarten to the moment they leave as a 5th grader. What is our promise to them? We can look at the projects, and this is something that I always used to tell principals to bring in their instructional leadership team, right? to do to cultivate and to build capacity, have the instructional leadership team put all the projects that teachers are doing out on the table and look at them and look at the standards that are happening in the projects in kindergarten. Look at the standards that are focused on in grade 1, in grade 2, in grade 3, so on and so forth. Do they allow a student to matriculate up and through in a way that allows the students to deepen learning in a couple of particular areas or across many areas? And there's no right answer there. But what's the magical moment is the conversation across the instructional leadership team around the core learning content and the success skills, right? Because if we think about the success skills as well, we can see what projects or what success skills are being focused on in K, 1, 2, 3, and what kind of humans will we produce if the projects focus on those success skills from K to 5, right? So for leaders, the work is always about engaging the instructional leadership team or the core team, and even the parent community, the families. Here's where our focus is with our projects. Here's the story that's going to tell with our students as they matriculate up and graduate from our school.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm really thinking from a teacher perspective, real quick. How do I adopt a project, or let me rephrase it. How can I create a project based on or based around existing curriculum resources I already have, right? How do I keep it aligned with the standards, making sure I'm following all of the curriculum bases to text and all those things that we already have in our classrooms?
Yeah, I can go ahead and answer that. So one of the things that we're really kind of looking to be able to do in project-based learning is really looking at the standards and the length of time a more traditional kind of textbook would take to teach those particular set of standards. And so we almost kind of want to do a swap, because project-based learning is not something in addition to the regular teaching and learning that we do. This is the learning. And so luckily for you all, us folks here at PBL Works have done a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So if you have not taken a workshop with us, you get to view our landing page and some details of some of the products that we have developed out. But if you have taken a workshop with us, you get access to over, I think it's like 80 projects so far we have right now, 80 projects, and you get a bulk of the framework of a unit project. And so I have selected one for you all, and this one in particular ranges from a K through 12. And I'm going to put on my teacher hat role right now, and I'm going to go back to my 4th grade classroom. And so it's like, I really enjoyed this project, or I'm really attracted to this project, but I'm a 4th grade teacher, and these standards are not set to my grade level or even to my state in particular. So how do I modify it to meet the needs that I need to teach? So I'm going to share my screen with you all right now. There we go. Can you all see that? We good? All right. So this project is titled Not Waiting on the World to Change. We can see that it's a K-12 project, and its subjects are ELA and social studies. So if you actually have taken a workshop with us, if you click into this Google Docs or Microsoft Word or the PDF format, it will download a whole project planner for you. And so I have taken the project planner, and I'm going to show you all how I modified it to meet my 4th grade classroom in California. So as we were developing out the project planners, they use C3 standards for social studies. C3 standards are the nationwide social studies standards. But again, these ones were pulled out for 6 through 8. And so what I did was I just did a vertical articulation. I went to C3 and I saw that they were pulling out civics number 2. And so then I pulled out civics number 2 for grades 3 through 5. Also, as I'm looking at this, I want to be looking at the nuances between language and really seeing, well, what are the differences that they're going to be asking for as they grow as a learner. And so what I did was I just switched out the C3 standards. And then I was thinking, well, I'm in California and my social studies is going to require me to teach California state standards for history and social studies, which is California history, because in these C3 standards, I'm not seeing it solicit California history for me. And so I know that I needed to be able to solicit some California history. So then I pulled out these two standards and I started to think about, in particular, what were the final products? And so I'm starting to think about like case studies. What is it that the very specific content that I want students to be able to study? And they were going to be developing out an issue statement, and then they're going to write an action plan. So I wanted them to be able to reference some historical events. And so what I had pulled out was thinking they can write these proposals to elected officials. And you could see that that is specifically what is asked for in this standard 4.5.4. And then I was thinking of an even more particular event, describe the history and development of California's public education system. And so my mind is already thinking of particular cases that I know that students could relate to. So I'm also starting to think about the context of my students. My students might be interested in language cases like Sylvia Mendez or the Lemon Grove incident or Lau versus Nichols, where those have to do with students as well, who they could probably relate to in age. And then from there, I started to look at, well, what would be some connections between ELA? And we can see that that is already laid out there for us in the project planner. And again, I'm just going to go back and do that vertical articulation and change the standards from 6th to 8th grade to 4th grade standards. And then, like Ari was saying earlier, is that we teach so much more beyond the content and skill. And so embedded in every project, our hope and our dream is that teachers are also including our success skills rubric. And so PBL Works has 6 different success skill rubrics. This one in particular is our creativity rubric. It called for a 6 through 12, so I just changed it to the 3 through 5 creativity rubric. And just like that, I was able to switch out all of my standards from this project to be able to meet my specific needs as a 4th grade teacher.
And this is where right after that step, we would do that unpacking, we would do that prototyping, so that when it says that students need to explain, Candace, can you throw that back up there real quick?
Yeah, of course.
Just trying to remember one of those standards. And go back up to those social studies standards from California. Students explain how California became an agricultural and industrial power. This is where Candace would need to think, okay, what does that sound like for my 4th graders to be able to explain that, right? And she would actually practice writing that out, and then she would need to put it within the product itself, right? So there's an issue statement with a summary, impact, and stakeholder perspectives. She now needs to situate that explanation within that product. And you don't have to prototype the entire product, right? But we really want to be clear about, where does that performance, that standards-based performance, live within this, and try that out. And just give yourself a few opportunities. It's the same thing that, we always talk about in teaching. Try the activity yourself first before you try it with students, so that you know where the blocks are going to be, the pathways and the pitfalls, right? Same thing here. Super important, because when you're planning at a high level, this is the most important foundational work. John was talking about it before, the alignment between the products, the standards, or the key understanding and success skills, and the driving question. That's the alignment work right there. And if you do that on the front end, you can be more confident that your project will elicit both the standards and everything else amazing that's going to come alongside doing that project work.
You're on mute, John. He's trying to get
All
it.
right, I'm seeing a couple of questions in the chat, but keep more of them coming, folks. And I've got one that is a real common question. Uh, People often ask, how many standards do I try to target in one project? What do you say to that one?
2. Just kidding. It's not always 2.
It
But here's
depends,
the
right?
Honey.
here's the deal, and what we've learned, right? And we've been doing a lot of learning at PBL Works as we've been developing project-based curriculum units. What we've been learning is that less is more. I have another frame to offer. The frame is foreground and background. I say put 2 standards in the foreground, because remember, we already talked about these standards being super, super complex, important, nuanced standards, right? Put those 2 in the foreground. Design your project, giving kids so many opportunities to play with, to learn, to manipulate those concepts, those skills within the project itself. You can also have 1 to 2 background standards. Those are the standards. So let me roll back and say the foreground standards are the ones that we would explicitly teach and assess, right? Students would have an opportunity to dig in, build knowledge around those, develop the products around those, and we would assess that. They would assess that. There'd be multiple opportunities and multiple forms of assessment around those 2 standards. The background standards are 1 to 2 other standards that will naturally link into those products or the processes that kids are doing, the tasks they're doing. So a lot of times there's a speaking and listening standard that's perfect to tag along, especially in the humanities world, because kids are often in their final team products presenting, right? And we know that we want them presenting all throughout the project. So there are multiple opportunities for them to practice. And we may not assess that, but it gives them, or we may not formally assess that, and we may not put it in the grade book, but they can practice that. They can still use a rubric to self-assess. We can even give feedback on those background standards. But when we plan the learning sequence, the storyline, the activities, when we build out the project path itself, we're really focused on those 2 foreground standards. And that you'll see with 2 standards or so will take up 3 weeks of instruction, right? Because there's so much more that happens in a project too.
Yeah, Ari, I think that's a great point about background standards for speaking and listening. It's also true, isn't it, reading is a feature of many projects, and writing, of course. So all those kind of ELA standards can be in the background.
Yeah, and literacy is one of our equity levers.
Right.
Right. And so there will always be opportunities for reading, speaking, listening, and writing. And so you can always choose one of those to add into your projects as well. Candace, did I miss anything on that? Would you add anything there?
No, I think you got all of the pieces, and I really appreciate you bringing up the foreground and the background, because sometimes what tends to happen in project-based learning, it's like, I'm doing this and I'm doing this and I'm doing this. It's like, yes, we are doing all of those things at the same time, but we really need to focus in on what is it exactly that I need to like plan around? What is it exactly that I need to teach? And I think that all of these background standards almost happen just kind of naturally within a project.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good.
And Ari, you
okay,
joked at the beginning about 2 standards per project, and it may be true. Does it depend on how the standards are worded? Like in some subject area that can be really specific, so you might have more. Whereas in, I don't know, history, it could be a big, broad standard, so you might have only 1.
Totally, 100%. And really, this is where the teacher's knowledge of their discipline, knowledge of their students, comes into play. It's all about what you may have already attended to one of the standards earlier in the year and you want to bring it along for more practice, right? So yeah, I think what we try to communicate is that like 5 or 6, to what Candace was saying, way too much.
Mm.
Like by including that many, we're not going to be able to attend as precisely and give students the rich, deep learning that they need around this. Now, we haven't talked about interdisciplinary projects, right? And so with an interdisciplinary project where you might be a core humanities teacher or you might be a STEM teacher doing math and science, there you might have 2 foregrounded science and 2 foregrounded math standards that are working collaboratively, developed throughout the project, right? That might have, but still within either discipline, we're not choosing so many that it becomes a 6 to 8 week project unless you're in that kind of a school. And you might be in that kind of a school. You're a project-based school. Everyone's been doing projects. You have the support from your principal, from your school to do longer, more extended, more complex projects. That can be. If you're just getting started or you've got a pacing guide, right? And you're working in a more traditional setting, just a handful.
I kind of want to add on to that, Ari, especially when we look at history and social studies. Like one of the big issues that we ran into is that we were looking at C3 standards and they weren't specifically calling out content. And we want to be able to design projects that address content and skill and concept. And so that was why we had to pull in additional standards from states, is to really hone in on that content piece. So we want to make sure that the standards we are pulling are balanced in content and in skill.
That's really good. And if anyone has any questions, if you have a question, drop that in the chat. We do have one, which is a great question to kind of take us to that segue to the end, but this is from a leader, okay? How do you know that this is going to yield positive outcomes for my students? How does it lead to a portrait of a graduate? I'm so glad you asked.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Candace, I want to just make sure there's space. Do you want to take first?
No, you go first and I'll add on. I need
Okay.
some more think time.
Yep. So I love the question about how do we know, right? How do we know question is a question about intentional planning on the front end, and then also assessment throughout and gathering evidence of learning, right? I spoke before about sort of a protocol that leaders can do with their instructional leadership team around alignment, vertical articulation, and looking at that. Another protocol that leaders can do to ensure that the learning is happening is a looking at student work protocol. And those looking at student work protocols can happen in the middle of a project. They can happen at the end of a project, right? And a looking at student work protocol is something that you can do whole staff. You can do with instructional leadership team first to build capacity and then spread it across your staff. You can model it at a staff meeting. But the idea is that you are gathering pieces of student work. And when I say pieces of student work, it's not necessarily a piece of writing. It could be a presentation, right? You could gather evidence of student learning by going into a classroom and watching students engage in a Socratic seminar. But there's a protocol where you are looking carefully with colleagues at the work students are producing. And you're analyzing it and saying, what do we notice that we see in the work? What are students able to do? And what is the next thing that students need to learn how to do? And it is an extremely powerful process for lots of reasons. One, it builds capacity to understand teaching and learning. Two, it creates conversation and calibrates everyone to look for the same things, right? And three, it gives you that evidence of how do we know project-based learning is working? We should be able to see it, right? We should be able to see it. And so it gives you an opportunity to talk about what you see.
That's really
Candace, I came off
Yeah,
mute.
no, I'm going to add on to that. So I just got like really excited because I saw all of the pieces like just connecting. And so this goes back to the importance of prototyping. You are really setting the standard so students can see what they should be, the level that they should be producing. But we also uplift 1 point rubrics because we want to be able to say, here is the standard, and let me give you space to go beyond this. And so we really try to encourage students to, yes, use the design and think outside of the box. And so you said this in the beginning, Ari, too, is like, well, how do we measure it? It's like, can students read the word? And can students read the world? It's because like project-based learning offers them to be able to do both. And like that's what we want to be able to get when we look back at our portrait of a graduate.
Yeah, and if you don't have, if your school or district does not yet have a portrait of a graduate, that is one thing that our organization can help you do is build that portrait of a graduate. And if you do have a portrait of a graduate, then you can do that practice of having your teams, your teachers bring in their projects and see, because we don't want to let that portrait of a graduate just be a poster on the wall. We don't want it to be a poster on the wall. We need it to live and breathe in the classrooms. And so you can look at your projects with that portrait of a graduate in mind, and you can ask the questions as a team. How are my students becoming critical thinkers through this project? Do we see opportunities? And you can look at the project designs and you can point to the places. How do we know students are developing the ability to critically or to evaluate, right? Or to summarize or to do those things? How are my projects giving our students the ability to become ethical and cultural leaders, right? If that's on your portrait of a graduate,
Yes. Well,
and
we
you do
have
that work together.
one last question, guys, before we start wrapping it up. This is a very great conversation. It's really deep. You know, you just can't have a surface talk about standards, right? Got to make sure that we show some growth. So the question is, how do you incorporate student voice in these types of projects?
It's a good question.
That's one.
I
What do you
can go
think?
ahead and start. So like when we're thinking about like student voice and choice, we really start to think about like how do they get to present the learning? How do they show mastery of learning? So we can give them different options of like, yeah, you can do a speech, like a written speech, and you can also do a recording of a speech. So giving them different modalities to be able to show the mastery of learning. And also we can provide opportunities to be able to select the actual content. So for example, in the project planner that I shared, we were going to highlight the educational development in California. So they can do particular case studies. Somebody might be studying the Lemon Grove incident. Somebody might be studying Sylvia Mendez. Somebody might be studying Lau versus Nichols. So then they would get to choose one of these three things that still connect back to the standard.
That's good.
I think I'll add real quick just two little beats to that. One is a former national faculty member, good colleague, friend, used to talk about voice as getting kids' voices into spaces where they are not usually, right? Having kids, giving power to kids' voices. So when you look at your project design and you think about the impact that kids can have on the local community, on the classroom next door, on the students who are in their class or across the school. We look at the project to identify where are the opportunities for those voices to go, for their ideas to flourish, so that they go beyond me, the teacher, and actually out and have an impact on the world. And it doesn't have to be big. They don't have to go to city council and present. They can, and that's amazing. but their work can be carried to those spaces. Their work can be carried outside of the boundaries of the classroom. And I think that is a really powerful lens to think about voice. Our voices as adults are traditionally the ones that drive instruction and drive decision making. How can we get their voices into those spaces and those positions as well?
Can I add something
Powerful.
onto that? It's
If it's
not
less than
about
30 seconds, Candice.
it's not about giving us our students a voice, but it's really about teaching our students how to use their voice.
Can I get some snaps on that in the chat? That's powerful. Very powerful, guys. And look, folks are giving me snaps. Go ahead, give me my snaps. Well, we have come to the end of our time today. We've come to the end of our Power Up series. However, we will be coming back to you sometime soon in the near future. But this has been amazing. John, don't you agree? This has been so great.
Yes, we covered a lot of territory. Hope everyone enjoyed it. By the way, we've got a free gift for those of you who stayed to the end. Candace mentioned that project she described. Usually it's only available to people who attend our workshop, but we're going to send you drop a link in the chat to the PDF of that project on Waiting for the World to Change. And you'll get a PDF of the project if you follow that link. All right.
All right, folks, if you want to learn more, continue the conversation. Please, by all means, take your phones out right now. I know I'm giving a demand. I'm asking you to come become engaged in the webinar. So take your phones and take a picture of that QR code. It's going to ask you some questions, and you can schedule a time to meet with any of us to talk about continuing your PBL journey as a teacher, as a school leader, as a district leader. You are welcome to reach out to us so that you can learn more about the PBL learning opportunities we have available. I see that we've put some things in the chat, so please make sure you take advantage of those resources as well. Also, if you are on any social media platform, please make sure that you shout us out. Let us know how you have been enjoying this PBL Power Up series. Real talk. It's been real talk, folks. Meaning, we really wanted you to walk away with some nuggets that can be, deep, long lasting, relevant, that you can use tomorrow, right? So tomorrow you're going to go in and use how many standards? Not 10, not 7. Come on, were you listening? About 2 to 3 standards, okay? So we want to thank you, and we want to say it's goodbye for now, but hey, not forever. We will see you guys in the future. Thank you for joining us today for our Power Up series, Real Talk, on Align with the Standards in PBL.
All right. Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Ari, you got quotations going on in the chat. Yeah, words to live by. Goodbye, thank you.